Well, welcome everyone, and welcome to another one of PBALC's Literacy Speaking live stream. I know that's a mouthful, but we were trying to get creative there with our name. Today, we are excited to welcome author Laurie Notaro, author of The Murderess. Well, we were talking a little bit about the book backstage, and it's so intriguing. I can't wait for Laurie to tell everybody about this murderess in the Arizona area that apparently everybody in the Arizona area knew about, but this is new to me, so it's very intriguing. We're so happy to have you, Laurie. Thank you for being on our live stream.
Thank you, Alba. It's my pleasure.
Well, let's get right into it because I know we have limited time and we may be interrupted. I know Texas has had crazy weather and it's a little bit stormy right now, so hopefully we won't lose internet or anything like that. But, there's crazy weather patterns going on in Texas right now. So introduce yourself and tell your viewers a little bit about yourself.
My name is Laurie Notaro, and I started out being a journalist. I'm just going to give you the short version. And then I was a reporter for the Arizona Republic and ended up I was also a humor columnist. And then 2001, I got a book deal to write a book that I'd already done. And so I've been writing books ever since. So I don't know what number this is. I don't know. I have no idea. I can count, but it's like 15, 16, 17. I don't know. But I've been doing this for a long time. And this is my second book of what we call historical fiction. However, both my books that were historical fiction, we called them fiction because they come from a narrative of first person as opposed from third person and being more like a nonfiction book. However, in both books, including this one, I stuck to the facts as closely as possible. It took me 10 years to research this book. It's based on a very true story that happened in Phoenix, Arizona in 1931. And being a journalist, I am devoted to the facts. And honestly, the facts always end up making a better story than what you could possibly make up. And I will tell you that I finished this book. I started writing it again like 10 years ago and then lost my book deal, came back. I went to Little A. I got them to publish this book. And so I finished this book, I think, in September of maybe 2022. I don't remember. I think so. But so many more things have come to surface since I even finished this book that are not included in this book. So facts of the case, things just keep bubbling up. It's like the La Brea tar pits. It's just like we just keep finding out more and more stuff the more people we talk to. So the story is never over. This story
there's like unsolved crimes from like the 1920s and 30s and 40s with all this new forensic technology out there that are now being solved. So it's like, it's so interesting. I love, forensic, true crime and all that kind of genre. And so, but it's so interesting that you went from writing a humor column to writing books like The Murderess. How did you get from there to
that's
now?
True. I mean, my initial career choice was to be an investigative reporter, and it's a very long story. I ended up writing a humor column, just filling in for someone when I was still in college. And then it just took off, and my investigative reporting took a backseat to the humor pieces. And so, because not a lot of people were doing humor, especially in the 90s, from a woman's perspective. Not saying that I'm like the flagship humor feminist writer. Irma Bombeck did it long before I did, also from Arizona. But that want and that need to find a good story and go behind and dig through a good story is always there for me. And those are actually the books that I kind of read. I don't read other humor books. I don't read romance and stuff like that. I read like Killers of the Flower Moon, right? I love that kind of stuff. So I just kind of went back to my very, very, very buried old roots in this book and in Crossing the Horizon, which is about some aviatrixes, three aviatrixes who made the transatlantic crossing prior to Amelia Earhart. in
Uh-huh.
1927, and no one ever remembers them. They made history and they are forgotten.
Yeah.
So, in any case, it was a joy to go back and do research. I love researching. Took me a long time. So this is just really what I love to do. And I'm going back. Humor was my book before this. I'm working on another humor book right now. And we'll see. These kind of books take so long to write that I need
Uh-huh.
something in between. So maybe in another
Yes.
10 years, I'll write another nonfiction
And
book.
I know, I mean, you don't necessarily develop your characters because they're semi biographical,
Sure.
but how do you choose, like, I guess the characters or the stories to research?
There, you know what?
What interests you about them? You're like, oh,
This
I
is
just
such
got
a
to write a story about
fascinating
that.
no, no, this is such a fascinating case, and it really is very it's the case that kind of first put Phoenix on the map. People really had never heard about Phoenix before. And
Really?
yes, Phoenix was just a
Okay.
very small Western town that was predominantly known for TB patients, tuberculosis
Mhm.
patients in the 20s and 30s would flock to Phoenix, and it became known as death's waiting room because so many people would die of TB. There was no cure, right? So they would go to Phoenix because of the dry climate. And that is actually how two of the women ended up there. All three of these women had tuberculosis, the murderer and her two friends that she killed. So this story
Wow.
was just so much in the fabric of Arizona, and it was everywhere when you were growing up. I remember she was captured again. She escaped from the Arizona State Hospital 7 times and was caught again, I believe, in 1969, went back to prison for 2 years, and then was finally paroled in 1972. And she did not die. Ruth Judd did not die, the murderess, did not die until 1998 when she was 96 years old. So she outlived everyone in this story. And the good thing about this story being so well known was that there was a really great bevy of information in the Arizona archives, in the libraries, in the Arizona Memory Project that not only had cataloged all of the news reporting that had been done, but also had recorded her oral histories. So in that way, I was able to kind of get into her head a little bit, see how she spoke, what her syntax is like, how she thought, what kind of person she was by giving these interviews. And some of them were 50, 100 pages long, which
So
was
research was a little bit easier for you because there was so much out there for you
there
to.
was a lot, but it
Mhm.
took me 10 years to go through everything. And there was so much research. I had so many materials that I did not end up using them all. I mean, the book as it is at almost 400 pages. I
Oh,
completely skipped her first trial because there's another book by Dwight Dobkins that is basically a transcript of that trial. So I didn't
mhm.
really need to go into that. And I sort that as a site, I cite that as a source in my book. So if people are interested, they can go back and look at it. But there was just so much. It became for me once I opened the lid of this story that it was not just a murder story. It was a story of a woman who was, and here's the dichotomy.
There's a lot of complexity to
Yeah,
it too. So I think that's what makes people ponder and question. It's like, did she do it? Did she not do it? Or, is this
exactly.
true or is this not true? Because there's like, huh, it's complex.
Yeah, Ruth Judd was a very kind woman. She
Mhm.
was generous and kind, and she loved children, and she worked as a nanny. And she wanted children so very badly, but she was also a woman who shot and killed her two best friends, and it was premeditated. And I can prove that she shot them. It was not self defense, as she claimed for all of those years.
Mhm.
It was not self-defense. And I, to be perfectly honest, Alba, when I went into writing the story, I was going to go into it as a woman who was accused of killing her two best friends and actually had done it in self-defense, and her narrative from that. But as soon as I got into the Arizona archives and I started reading the autopsy reports, I was like, oh, no, 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 no. No, she did this. And the way that I know that is that on both of the victims, they were both killed ultimately by gunshot wounds to the head at very, very close proximity and left stippling, which is burning from the gunpowder and the muzzle of the
Uh-huh.
gun. And you cannot get that stippling. You will get a flash of it if it's held a little bit away, but when it's directly against the temple, you're going to get a certain kind of burn that cannot be duplicated in any other way. Also, the exit and entrance wounds of those bullets were barely several millimeters apart. And if you're in a struggle, number one, you're not going to get your muzzle straight across into a temple, so that you're going to be fighting.
Mm-hmm.
So that right there told me, no. She actually killed these women that she loved dearly. She loved dearly. They were her
Both of them were sick as well, too, right? Her friends.
they were both sick with TB. One was sicker than the other.
Okay.
And it's a whole complicated story of how she got to this point. The jealousy was basically over a man.
Mm.
And she was actually married, and she had been married for about 10 years to a doctor named Dr. William Judd. And she married him when she was 19 and he was 42. There was quite a difference. So once she married Dr. Judd, he confessed to her on their honeymoon that he was a morphine addict from an injury he had sustained in World War I.
Oh, geez.
And from then, because he was a doctor and he kept getting fired from all of these hospital jobs and doctor positions because he would help himself to the narcotics. And so eventually they were forced to go and work in Mexico for mining companies, because they were not, either they didn't really care or they weren't doing too thorough of checks.
This almost sounds like a soap opera too, along with
Absolutely. Yeah.
Gosh.
So they lived in Mexico for 5 years. Probably actually more than that. It was probably 5 or 6 years, of which he lost as many jobs. And he was always going back and forth through rehab, and she would have tuberculosis relapses, and she would have to go to California for to be treated in a sanitarium. It's just really a very complicated story. And then finally,
she had TB
she had TB too. Yeah. And he also told her that on her honeymoon. He said, you have tuberculosis. And so therefore we can never have children. I'm an addict. You have TB, because he could tell he was a doctor. She had this flush on her cheeks, and she did come close to dying several times because her tuberculosis was so bad.
Oh my.
Yeah. So all three of these women had tuberculosis, right? She ends up in Phoenix because after they leave Mexico, he decides he's going to go into rehab. He's going to send her back home to her parents in Indiana. But at the very last minute, he gets on the train and he goes to California to go to the VA hospital. The very last minute, she's still waiting for her train to come in. He's gone. She meets a woman named Lucy Ryder, who compliments her hair, because Ruth always had gorgeous hair, just finger waves, really, really beautiful. And this lady says to her, I am going to open up a beauty salon in California. Would you like to come and work for me? And Ruth says, yes. She cashes in her ticket to Indiana. She hops in Lucy Ryder's car. They make it to Phoenix. The car breaks down.
And this is in the 30s? You think about like this kind of stuff happening with young kids, because she's young.
She's
and you're like, oh yeah, that's like young kids. They're crazy. This would never happen in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I'm like, yeah, crazy stuff happened in that too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Not a whole lot has changed. I mean, I know people think of the good days that never were, but not a whole lot has changed. Kids were still, wild. I wouldn't say wild. I would say that Ruth had been married since she was 18. She was really looking for an adventure on her own. Her marriage was kind of over, and she wasn't going back to California to meet up with her husband. She was going back to get a job at this hair salon and start her own life. But they break down in Phoenix. Lucy Ryder has enough money to get on the train and get to California. Ruth does not. And so Ruth stays in Phoenix. She's stranded, and she stays in the YWCA, answers a job for a nanny. is a nanny for a woman who also has tuberculosis and 3 children. So Ruth is taking care of the kids while the mother is very, very ill. And in the meantime, Ruth strikes up an affair between the very, very handsome and powerful man who lives next door named Jack Halloran. Jack eventually gets her a job as a medical secretary at a clinic. And I'm really compressing this stuff. There's so much that happens in between. At the clinic, she meets a woman named Anne Leroy, who's an x-ray technician. So for 1931, for a woman to be operating x-ray machinery is really, really significant. You know, it's in the 30s that wasn't happening. Not only were women in the Depression not getting jobs because all the jobs were going to men who had families, not, you know, let alone women who had children to feed as well.
So did she have to get certified to do this job, or was it just like, we don't have enough men, you're going to do it?
She was one of the only people in the country who knew how to run a brand new x-ray machine. The new technology.
And how did she learn how to do that?
She learned it in Portland. She had been in the medical field for quite some time. She was a little bit older than Ruth was. She was in her 30s, 32.
Okay.
And so she had already established her career. And so she was working the x-ray machine. They strike up a friendship. And so Ruth is down there basically by herself, with the exception of her married boyfriend. And so Anne says, come over and meet my friend Sammy. We've moved from Alaska because Sammy has terrible tuberculosis. And the doctor said this would make her feel better. And so the 3 women become really good friends and they depend on one another. They feed each other. In fact, they actually move in together for a short time. They share their resources. Eventually it is discovered, Ruth discovers that Anne and Sammy are a couple. They are gay. They are lesbian people in the 30s, which was, of course, just
my goodness, so much going on in the story.
Going on. And so Jack has a lot of powerful friends. Remember, Jack is Ruth's boyfriend. He runs a lumber company named O'Malley's, which was still in business when I was a kid and a young adult. So he ran O'Malley's, and at that time, Phoenix was a boom town. So he was a mover and shaker and making all these deals, but he had clients that he needed to entertain. It was a depression. It was during Prohibition, and he couldn't take his friends back to his house. So he would take them over to Sammy and Anne's house, which was a duplex in downtown Phoenix. And so Ruth would be there and he would entertain. He would dance with, you know, and then he'd bring a bunch of booze, which was moonshine. Eventually he starts bringing some illicit drugs, and then more of his friends come over, and it comes to more than entertaining when it comes to Ruth and some of her friends. Because at that time, these men were giving them gifts. They were paying their rent. They were buying them groceries. They were buying them fur coats, buying them clothes, taking them out to dinner. It was a way for these women to survive. Lots of people say it was a prostitution ring. I don't believe that. I do not believe that. I think that these women were not prostitutes. They were doing what they needed to get by. This is an opportunity to survive until the Depression was over, and they took it. At one point, Ruth breaks up with Halloran because she feels so guilty because she is still married. And Anne swoops in and decides that Halloran's a pretty high roller and she can probably get a lot out of him. But Ruth is jealous. And that jealousy grows and grows and grows until she decides that she has had enough of Anne and that Anne is tormenting her. And Anne is just blatantly flirting with Jack in front of her.
Jack, in the meantime, is still married, correct?
Oh, yeah. But this is during the summer of 1931. So all of the wives in Phoenix, is too hot. There's no air conditioning. It's too hot for women to live, women and children who don't have to go to day jobs to live in Phoenix when it's 110 degrees. They all moved to Flagstaff, Prescott, and Sedona for the summer. So they leave in May and they don't come back until October. And this murder happened on October 16th. Yeah, so the women were still gone. The men were free to do whatever they wanted. So,
okay, so I understand why she murdered Anne, But why did she murder her other
It's a
friend?
really good question. She really loves Sammy.
Mm-hmm.
Sammy was so sick. She was not involved. She was friends with these men and they loved chatting with her, but
Mm-hmm.
she was too sick to partake in any of the sexual activity that was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why I don't really believe that it's like this. She killed Sammy on purpose. She didn't. Ruth, and I have to back up, since she was a young child, she exhibited some strange behavior, which today I think we
I
could
was going to ask you because there's a lot of question, from commentators that question Ruth's mental health, mental
absolutely
state.
nail on the
And
head.
has she always had mental issues?
She was, as a child, she lied about big things as far as like her mother having a baby, her mother breaking her leg, like some crazy things. But then once she hit puberty, things got a little bit crazier. She had accused someone of raping her and getting her pregnant. But even at that time, she did not know. She was 16. Her father was a reverend. She did not know what sexual intercourse was.
Mm.
Her mother had told her, when you walk into the woods with a man, you have a baby. Come back pregnant.
Okay.
No, don't ever walk into the woods with a man, right? So she did not understand that. And she ran away several times during that episode and had other different episodes in which her family recognized. And I think that's why they allowed her to marry Dr. Judd, because he seemed very stable. They didn't know about his addiction. He was much older, and they thought that it would be a very safe environment for her to be in, let alone it was going to be a catalyst to her completely spiraling down. Today, although I am not a psychiatrist, I have consulted with medical professionals, mental illness, psychiatrists, psychologists, given her the symptoms of what had. Of course, she's no longer here. We can't examine her, but it looks like she may have had manic depression, bipolar, borderline, something like that, in which she would have high highs and very low lows and then spiral downward. And especially when you combine those with a lot of sleeping pills, which she was taking, moonshine, which she had never really had before, cocaine, which Jack Halloran had, the wheels really fall off the cart. And to go back to your question, why Sammy? She never, ever planned on killing Sammy, which tells you how skewed her thinking was. The last night of their lives, the fight that they had concerned Anne flirting with Jack. Ruth had introduced a woman named Lucille Moore to Jack. Lucille Moore had syphilis, reportedly. Anne was mad about that because she said, now we're all going to get syphilis. We're all going to die. There is no cure. And so there was a fight about that. And that is what probably tipped off the whole thing. In Ruth's story, the fight happened after their argument. But what I think happened was they had a fight. It was too late for Ruth to catch the streetcar home. She ended up spending the night at their house. She had a gun in her purse. 3 times previous in that week, she had gone into the girl's house. She still had the key. And she had sat on the sofa all night long, waiting to get enough nerve to shoot Anne. So this night, she was tossing and turning. She was agitated. She was very anxious. She heard Sammy get up to use the bathroom, and she thought, yes, this is the time that I need to go and shoot Anne. So she did. And Anne and Sammy from the bathroom said, it was like a 22 or 27. It was a very, very, if you can consider a gun small, it was not a high caliber gun. It did not make a big sound. And so Sammy called from the bathroom, Anne, what fell in there? She thought it was maybe didn't think anything of that. And then she comes out and she sees Ruth in the hallway with a gun, and the chase is on. We don't really know what happened. We've got Ruth's account of what happened. I kind of put it together, but I really do leave that part to the reader. And in a matter of minutes, Sammy is also dead. And then there's a mess to clean up. And so she calls Jack, and Jack comes over, and One of the girls ends up dismembered. They both end up
In a
in
trunk, apparently.
and by that
Oh gosh.
morning, they are on a train with Ruth to Los Angeles, where her plan is to dump them into the ocean.
God.
So that's where we are with this story.
And so, did Ruth? I know you said she passed away in the 80s.
In the
Did
90s.
she ever? Was she ever interviewed? Did she ever speak about it after the trial?
Yes, absolutely she did. And in 1996, a book came out that was called The Trunk Murderess by Jenna Bommersbach, which I had worked with at Phoenix Magazine. And that book is more of a nonfiction book. And it's absolutely a nonfiction book. However, I do believe what happened was Ruth was just tired. By that time she had changed her name. It was Marion Lane. And I do know that Jana had chased her for a decade at least. And Ruth finally sat down and said, all right, I will tell you my story. You can't ask any questions. This is what happened. And she tells the story. And that's the story that Jana writes. However, things don't match up in that book. And I think Jana knew that. Jana has since died. She died earlier. She died right before my book came out. I actually met her in the archives when I was doing a story and doing research. She said, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm writing a book about Ruth Judd. In the time since Jana had written her book, a confession letter had surfaced from the Arizona Historical Society that had been there for 40 years. It was in the files of her lawyer from her insanity defense, had been under lock and key until he died, and just been donated to the Arizona Historical Society. He wasn't a lawyer he was a good lawyer, but he was not a famous lawyer. He didn't go on to be governor. So the papers just kind of sat there. And then finally they got scanned in a couple decades later. And one of my really good reporter friends, and an actual friend, was down there and said, let's see what's new with the Ruth Judd file. And he found that letter and called me and said, do you know what I just found? And I was like, okay. We're putting the pieces together now. This is really, so we have, in Ruth's words, what happened that night. And I think she spoke.
What really happened.
Yeah. And that, except for one thing, she said that Jack had nothing to do with the cutting up of the body, which I don't think is true. Ruth weighed 102 pounds. Sammy was 140 pounds. Do you know how to cut up a body? I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. And she said she did it with a butter knife. But I've seen autopsy photos, and that was not done with a butter knife. That was done with a saw. I don't encourage you to look up these photos, by the way. They're really gruesome. They're very disturbing. So
in the end, Ruth never really paid for any of the crimes.
Well, she was sentenced to hang. She was sentenced to death when they convicted her of Anne's murder. Anne was not dismembered. Sammy was dismembered. So they convicted her of Anne's murder. She was never tried for Sammy's murder. And she was sentenced to hang and then appealed with an insanity defense, which this lawyer had her write this letter. And even he thought the letter was so crazy. He said, oh no, folded it up, put it in a safety deposit box. It never saw the light of day. And he said, write it again with a little bit of this stuff in it. Because she appears very sane in the letter. The letter is online. You can read it. In fact, the letter it's in my book. The actual letter is in my book. So you can read it. You don't have to go to the memory site, but you can see her handwriting and how beautiful her handwriting is and how she speaks. And it is just, it's bonkers. It is just
my gosh. So what do you hope, Laurie, that readers will take from this book?
I don't necessarily want to set the story straight. Because, like I said, there's still things that are bubbling up to the surface. 2 weeks ago, we found out more stuff about this case that we've been searching for that just now became available. Just, who the doctor was who actually cut Sammy up. We found out who he was. He was just been known as Dr. Brown. Turns out his name is Dr. Brown. He was the county physician. We found out who he was. I didn't know that when I finished this book. I had no idea. I could not find the records. We found the records through, it's a long story, but, and other things, just people who had met Ruth after I had finished this book. I met one of Ruth's friends who I've become close with. and who took care of her until she died, and she did live a long life. She was in the mental facility from 1932. She was in prison from 1931 until 1933. And then she went to the Arizona State Hospital from 1933 until 1965, I believe, but escaped 7 times. Once walking to Yuma, which is over 150 miles away, without shoes, drinking out of canals, and eating garbage, right? So this is a woman who was she was a really strong woman. She was a really nice woman. She just killed people. And she had bad exit strategies. So what I want people to take away from is that this was not a self-defense. This is a woman who in 1931 desperately needed help. There was no help available. And in many ways, it is a feminist story. Now, I don't see Ruth as a hero. She really did kill 2 very promising young women. Possibly a third. There's possibly a third later on in Oakland, California, but that is for a long time. And that's its own book. I did not want to get into it. But the story is that people can spin out, and we have this legend, and she is held up in Arizona as this kind of a patron saint of injustice, where it's not really the truth. That's not the truth. Ruth Judd had some problems. But after the murder and after her release, after she was pardoned in 1972 by Jack Williams, who was our governor then, she never did anything bad ever again. Her friends loved her, and the people who took care of her were her nurses from the Arizona State Hospital. She moved in with them. They took care of her until she died. When she was on oxygen, of course, she had TB. So in the end, and she died when she was 98 years old. So it's a story of kind of what women had to go through in the Depression. It's a story of murder. It's a story of murdering your 2 best friends. How does someone do that? And honestly, the thing that struck me the most when I was writing this book was she was an ideal person. She was a loving woman. Given the right circumstances, how close are any of us to doing something so heinously awful? Right? You don't know what you think you know what your boundaries are, but maybe we don't know what our boundaries are. And that's what struck me the most about all this. It's just like, she's not that much different from me. I don't think that I could kill someone, but if I was loaded with all these drugs and I had mental illness that wasn't being addressed, I don't know what I would be capable of. Right? So, and this story has stayed with Phoenix for almost 100 years. It's still, the murder house is still there.
Yeah. And in these true crime stories, what gets me about them is that, the murderers or the people that commit, the serial killers, they're almost like become prominent people. And then the victims are forgotten about. And it's like, wait a minute. You got to remember, she did kill 2 people.
Absolutely right.
So and she's not that great of a person.
That was written about this story barely touched on Anne and Sammy at all. And they were people. They were people. They were nice people. They were funny. They were good friends. They loved each other dearly. And this is not an aside, but Sammy's great niece, who is named Sunny Worrell, and this is her timeline. She was a research librarian. This is Sunny's book. I got a lot of notes. A lot of our research overlaps, but Sunny was the great niece to Sammy, which kind of gets confusing. Sunny was a research librarian for the National Institute of Health. So she knew her stuff. She knew how to do research. And she was the same age as I was. She spent 30 years of her life documenting this case. And every one of her facts or mentions has a bibliography. She cites every single source. So that was a gold mine for me. Sunny, the great niece, died in 2014 of pancreatic cancer. She died very, very suddenly. But she was very good friends with the friend that I had mentioned before, who had found the letter in the Arizona archives, the confession letter. He was a reporter from New Times. He was a colleague and a friend of mine. And he said, I am so sick of writing this story. He's like, you're working on the book. You want the archive. This is before this book was published. And I said, yes, I do. So I got an insight to Sammy and Anne that I would have never gotten any other way because it was written by a family member, right? So in that way, I was able to piece together their story because Sunny had gone to Alaska where they lived before and gotten all that stuff and did a ton of research about. That's how I know that Anne was this, incredible woman in the medical field who was running this technology that most people knew nothing about. So with Sunny, I could not have written the book that I wrote without Sunny's work. So I owe her a huge debt. But I asked Sunny's mother permission and I sent her the book before I wrote it. I said, I'm using Sunny's book for my researches at school with you. And she said, yeah, Sunny was never going to write a book. So this is good that you're doing that. So,
because I think all three of them, I know Ruth gets the most attention because she's murdered. But I think all three of them, all three women have great stories. To be honest, I mean, you could write a book just from either, any of the women.
Yeah.
Because like you said, they were living, they were just they're interesting characters.
They are. They're so rich. All of them are so rich. And they really did have a very deep friendship, which is really the tragedy of this. And the catalyst to all of this was Jack Halloran. Had he not flirted back with Anne, and I'm not putting the blame on the victims, but it was enough to set Ruth off. He was a catalyst between all of them. And
people forget about that too. It's like, whenever there's affairs and things like that, you talk about true crime from the past, and it's like the woman murders so-and-so, the man or whoever, or his wife because of an affair. But it's like, where's the man's blame in all this? It's like, it's only the woman. It's like, okay, it takes two to tango.
Yeah, he played Anne against Ruth constantly. And he would say to Ruth, if she didn't feel like entertaining him drunk at 2:00 in the morning, he actually had said, okay, fine, I'm going to Anne's, and would leave.
So many great points to this story. It's everything about it is so complex and intriguing. Do you want to read a selection for our viewers very quickly?
Yes. Yeah, so what I'm going to read,
they can get a taste of the book.
I kind of start like in the middle of the story on this. When you're reading from a novel, it's very difficult to find a good spot to start. So I'm just going to start on page 1. So this is chapter 1. The date is October 19th, 1931. The first drop of the rust-colored liquid that splashed on the wooden railway platform in the Union Station was not noticed. Neither was the 2nd, 4th, 5th, or 20th. But 10 minutes after the porter placed the black Packer trunk on its side after the train from Phoenix had come to a stop, the stain began to spread. It leached out beyond the corner of the trunk, seeped in between the planks of wood, and settled in a dark, growing puddle underneath the smaller gray steamer that accompanied it. The first porter who saw it ignored it. He had a full compartment of baggage to unload, and this was not his car. Another porter stopped for a moment, assumed it was water, and moved on. The messenger from the Golden State Limited train stopped, bent down, swiped his index finger through the small pool, and examined the dark, murky liquid. He took a sniff. It smelled of rot. If you can hear my dog, I apologize. It's probably the mailman. I have not heard the doorbell ring yet, which means it's FedEx. If it's FedEx, I'm going to have to get up and get it. But for right now, we're staying with this. He checked the tag attached. The name scribbled on it read Judd. Sir, he called out to the chief porter. It took several attempts to get his attention. I think we have something odd here, sir, he said, holding out his fingertip. I think we have some smuggling. A deer, probably. Arthur Anderson sighed and studied the accumulating stain. We'll need to bring the trunks into the baggage room. Don't let anyone claim them until they see me first, he said, and then wrote the same instructions on the baggage tags. Together, they shifted the larger trunk, exposing an expansive area of liquid that had gathered underneath. Anderson wrinkled his nose. God, that's bad, he said to the messenger, who nodded. They dragged the trunks to the small office on the platform not far from where they had been unloaded, a telling trail of darkness smeared behind. They placed them as far away from their desk as they could. The pool was growing with speed, the stench gathering potency as well. It took 20 minutes for a petite blonde woman to appear at the baggage room door. She waved to get Anderson's attention, then handed him her claim ticket. She had a young man with her. He had bushy red hair, and he was her companion. I screwed up that sentence, sorry. Anderson studied the woman for a moment. She was slight, a smooth complexion and wide, deep-set eyes. A pretty thing. She was clothed nicely in clean, fashionable dress and a matching hat, tilted and poised on her head of light curls, which stopped just below her chin. She carried a brown leather satchel in one gloved hand and had the other in the pocket of her jacket. Her shoes were bright and unscuffed. Her lips had a slight tint to them, pinkish, not gaudy. She didn't look like a smuggler. A little girl like this? But things were different now. Several years into the Depression, even prominent, upstanding people were employing all sorts of means to keep their families fed and stop the banks from coming to their homes. You couldn't go by looks alone anymore, he knew. Didn't matter who had nice shoes and who didn't. None of it mattered. Even if a lady was wearing gloves, pardon me. If there was a deer in that trunk, and he suspected there was, he would have no choice but to call the authorities. Are these the ones you're looking for? He asked, pointing toward the black and gray trunks in the corner. She smiled brightly and said, "Oh, yes, thank you." Anderson looked at her again, noted her cheerfulness, then moved his eyes to her claim tickets. "What was the name on that tag, ma'am?" he asked. "Judd," she said quickly. "Mrs. Judd." "Thank you, Mrs. Judd. Can you tell me what the contents are?" he asked. "Medical books," she replied without hesitation, "for my husband. He is a physician." "Did you pack those trunks yourself, Mrs. Judd?" he asked. She did not look alarmed, but was clearly taken aback. "I don't understand," she said, looking him in the eye. "Is there a problem? May I just have my trunk, please?" "Come with me," Anderson said, and led the woman and her companion into the office where the trunk stood, the spot beneath the larger trunk dark and wet. "Mrs. Judd, you noticed that disagreeable odor?" She sniffed briefly, delicately, and shook her head. "No, I'm sorry, I don't." The chief porter looked at her. The smell was not only palpable, it was overbearing. He couldn't help but notice it, even from several feet away. Flies had begun to gather, buzzing above it, several of them landing on the top. "You don't detect any smell coming from your trunk?" he asked again. "I do," her companion said. "That is awful. What could be causing that smell?" "I don't," she replied, shaking her head, her eyes fixed on the chief porter. "May I take my trunks now, please?" Anderson shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Mrs. Judd, this trunk is leaking," he informed her, pointing to the collection of liquid below. "Are you sure there are only medical books in there?" "Of course I am," she said, a bit irritated. "I'm just bringing them to my husband. I told you, he's a physician." Anderson didn't want to get involved with this, calling the police, having her taken away, all for some pieces of meat. He was sure of it. There was a deer in that trunk. Parts of a deer, anyway. "Mrs. Judd, I'm going to have to ask you to open this trunk, please," he said with a deep breath. She shook her head. "I can't," she said sharply. "I don't have the key." "All right, then, who has the key?" Anderson asked, looking at her male companion. "I told you, these are my husband's trunks. These are his books," she said, becoming more agitated, her eyes widening. "This is not my husband. This is my brother. My husband has the key. I was only to bring them to him." Her companion looked puzzled. Anderson knew. She realized she had been caught. Was it worth calling the police, getting this woman in trouble? He doubted she had the money for bail if she was shipping this kind of cargo from Phoenix to Los Angeles. He felt sorry for her. He had as soon as he saw her wave him down at the door. "Mrs. Judd, I would appreciate it if you would go and get the key and open up this trunk for me," he said. "I cannot let you have either of them until you do. I'm sorry." The woman took in a deep breath through her nostrils and bit the inside of her lip. "That is all right," she told him. "I will get the key for my husband, and then we can get this all sorted out." "I'm sorry," Anderson said, knowing that he was forcing her to walk away from money that she probably needed badly. She shook her head sharply once. This was clearly a bother. She turned and walked down the platform, her companion following her, and was quickly absorbed by the crowd of other passengers making their way into the station. Anderson shook his head. He felt a bit responsible for what he had forced her to lose. A nice lady like that. The smell was there, he told himself. The smell was there.
Oh my. And didn't she disappear into the crowd and
Oh,
they
she
had to search
did.
for her?
5 days.
Isn't that
5
an
days she was
admission
on the
guilt right
lam.
there?
Yeah, he
She,
really thought it was deer and he let her go. But when the police came later, they had to open it, and that's when they found Ann and Sammy.
oh gosh. Oh, this is such almost disturbing, very disturbing true story, but I think it needs to be turned into a Netflix series.
You keep thinking those thoughts. Where, as I told you, we're still digging into the story, and like I said, we found out
Finding
some
new
stuff last week.
information. So, what other projects or books are you currently working on, or are you just still adding on to this Murderess?
I'm working on a project related to this.
Mhm.
We're going to be doing a museum exhibit at the Arizona Historical Society later this year, also at the Sunny Slope Historical Society, which is a place in Phoenix where Ruth Judd / Marion Lane eventually lived and died in Sunny Slope, which is not a suburb. It's kind of in the middle of Phoenix, but they just call it Sunny Slope. Working on another related project. And right now I'm writing a book that's back to humor. And it's about being middle-aged and having just going into my 60s, right? I mean, when I started writing my books at 22, I never would imagine that I would live to be in my 60s, yet see all the changes and how my life and body have deceived me. And you just never think about those things. Like someday, I know that my grandma is never able to get off the floor if we leave her there, but that will happen to me. You never think that. You never think I will have to, I will never be able to laugh without urinating. Or sneezing.
The humorous aspects of getting old. And
yes,
isn't it a delight to kind of write a book like that after the heavy lifting of this book?
Yes, absolutely. Are you kidding? Most of this book takes place within Ruth's head, right? In first person. So I really had to become Ruth Judd in writing this book. And I put that part off as long as I could, and I couldn't wait. It was the last part in the book. I wrote that all out in 40 days. I worked every single day, 14 hours a day, spit it out, and then when I handed in this book, I gave it to my editor. I said, I don't want to see this thing for 3 months. I need to recuperate.
Yeah,
I'm a mess. I'm having nightmares, and I'm on a train with Sammy and Ann, and it is 1932, and they are yelling at me because I did not save them.
Yes.
Right.
Well, that people, investigators, journalists say that when they interview serial killers and then write their story afterwards, they just have to go and unwind or take a vacation or do something because they're like, they're in my head. I feel so messed up.
You see the world differently. And I wanted to get back to the way I was seeing my world. I wanted to get back to my world, not Ruth Judd's world. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm excited to about your other book because I mean, as I'm getting older too, it's like, oh my gosh.
Well, the book that I'm writing now, and the last book that I wrote was Excuse Me While I Disappear, and that was about kind of going into menopause and how you vanish from society. People just don't see you anymore. Like I decided to go gray. I'm no longer dyeing my hair. And that was a change. You would not believe how people treat you differently. So it's kind of a primer to getting old. It's all the things my mother and grandmother never told me that your mother and grandmother never told you about being a woman and getting older. We just don't talk about it. And so now I'm dealing with aging parents, and even more into, it's not middle age anymore. I'm almost on Social Security. I'm not middle-aged. Middle-aged people don't go, but I still consider myself middle-aged. You know what I mean? So
but it's important to find humor in it, right? Because otherwise
you just shrivel up and die. It's so terrible. Exactly. And so humor is fright. It's fear with a twist of relatability. So I want to put a good spin on this and make people feel better about living to this age that they never thought that they would survive to.
Well, I'm excited to read that book, and I'm excited to get the Murderess book and dive into it more deeply. And I'm
I hope you
telling
like
you,
it.
this needs to be a Netflix series.
Keep your fingers crossed. Send me good juju. That's
Yes,
awesome. That way I can
absolutely.
really retire. Yeah.
So where can people get information about you, your books, upcoming projects?
I will let you know. Okay. So one of the projects that I'm working on is my website. It's laurienotaro.com. It's right down here. You can see that right there. There it is. laurienotaro.com. The whole front page, it's got my other books on it, but the whole intro is devoted to the Murderess. I've got I've been collecting photos of Ruth and the crimes and all the scenes. Of course, I'm not going to put pictures up there of the autopsies of the girls who are dead. I will not do that. They're not gruesome photos, but there's about 100 of them up there if you want to know what they look like, what Jack Halloran looked like, what Sammy and Ann look like, what the house looked like, what the house looks like now. The house now is actually a law office. It's been completely restored. And the other half of it is, I think it is the Norwegian consulate for Phoenix, Arizona.
Is the house haunted? Is the law office haunted?
No, I don't think so. I've been in there many, many times.
Okay.
I know, and I know the guy who restored it very well. And no, I don't think it's haunted, but families lived there for decades not knowing what had happened in that bathtub. That bathtub where Sammy was cut up is still there.
Oh no.
Still there.
Oh,
Still there.
no.
So
okay. And
yeah.
Laurie, lastly, we'll post all your links to your website and everything else on as usual. And lastly, we always ask all our authors, give us 2 book recommendations, or what are you currently reading?
Oh, I wish I had them. I just put them in the bookcase. What I'm reading right now is I'm reading a book called, actually I just finished it. It's called Fox Ash. Okay. And I'm not remembering the author's name. She's Irish. She was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. It is a story about the Depression in Great Britain and how people got little plots of land in order to kind of survive. It's another psychological book. It's very
really,
yes. It's it's very similar to The Murderess in the way that it plays with psychology, and you're going along with
emotions and
with the protagonist, and you don't know if she's unreliable or not. Like, you don't know if Ruth is an unreliable narrator. You don't know what's truth or not. And then I'm reading another one called Foster. That was also written by she's another Irish writer. I got an Irish kick. And it is a very short book. You can read it within 2 hours, about a small girl in Ireland whose family cannot take care of her. And so she goes to live with her aunt for the summer and has this glorious, amazing summer, and learns a lot. And it's a very, very small, I don't remember the name of that book, of that author either. Forgive me, but
that sounds marvelous.
Yeah.
There was
just a movie out with oh my God, I'm 60. I'm having seen
brain fog.
The guy who played Oppenheimer.
Okay. I can picture him, but I don't know his name.
Murphy. He was just in this will lead you to this other book. He was just in a book that called All the Great Small Things. He wrote that book too. She wrote Foster. She also wrote that book. So 7 Degrees of Separation, you can find her.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for those recommendations. And Laurie, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It was amazing to hear about this.
So fun.
I'm a true crime junkie. I really am.
It's true crime. It doesn't get any truer than this. Yes.
Exactly.
And for people who say, how true is it? It's 99.9% true. The 0.1% is sometimes I had to squash time. Like, Dr. Judd gets fired in real life 7 times. In the book, he only gets fired about 3 or 4 times. So I write about all 7 times. No one wants to see that.
Exactly. Well, make sure and check out Laurie on her social media and website, and make sure and follow her on there. And please get her book, The Murderess, because I know it's going to be a Netflix series soon, and you're going to want to read it before the series comes out.
Always read the book first. Always read the book first.
Yes. So you can get it at any bookshop, Barnes and Noble, Amazon bookshop.
You can order it from Barnes and Noble. You can get it from Amazon. You can order it from an independent bookstore. But you will have to order it. You will have to order it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Laurie.
But Amazon, you'll get it in 2 days. But we support independent booksellers as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Laurie, and hopefully we'll be able to feature you when your next book comes out again.
Oh, wonderful. That's so great. Thank you so much, Alva.
Thank you, Laurie, and we'll see everybody next time.